In this edition of Locked On Capitals, Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom return to this lineup. What does that mean for the lineup going forward for this team? We'll talk about all of that and more next on this weekend edition of Locked On Capitals.
You're Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this weekend edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up or leave some comments. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this weekend edition, we don't normally do weekend shows, but I think this is worth it. Your Washington Capitals get back two huge pieces in the form of Nick Backstrom and Tom Wilson, who have missed the entire season. Nick Backstrom, who was said was probably not going to return until the end of the season, if not the beginning of next season. To have him back in January, it just defies everything that we thought, considering the magnitude of the injury that he had and the procedure that he had done. You know, the book on it was that, he'll probably never come back. And if he does come back, what capacity he's going to be at. We'll push all that aside. Nick Backstrom and Tom Wilson, two huge players, are back on this team. And, they are able to do that in part. And, this is a roundabout way of saying it. John Carlson was added to the long-term injured reserve. And why is that a good thing? You're saying John Carlson, he's the top blue liner on the team. How is that a good thing? Well, they can put his money to long-term injured reserve, which means Nick Backstrom and Tom Wilson can come back into this team. And it's going to be okay because that money's off the books on John Carlson. If John Carlson had not been injured, then they would have probably had to move some pieces out of this team. So in a roundabout way, it's a good thing, even though that's kind of an odd thing to say. So this was a busy Saturday for your Capitals, even though they're not on the ice. In this story in The Athletic, they talked about it. In order to accommodate Backstrom's $9.2 million cap hit, the team moved John Carlson and his $8 million from injured reserve to long-term injury. Carlson is sidelined indefinitely after being struck by a slap shot on the right side of his head on December 23rd. And if you saw that, that was kind of, almost overshadowed the magnitude of the night as Alex Ovechkin passed Gordie Howe for second all time. And Ovechkin mentioned it as much in his post-game presser. He was talking about it was a special night, but kind of overshadowed a little bit by John Carlson, who we all know who is a big player on this team, not only for his play, but just to what he brings to this team. And then the tough things happened after that. Who had to come out of the lineup to accommodate those players coming? And one of those players was Aliaksei Protas. And Aliaksei Protas was one of the guys that played so well in camp that they couldn't afford to send him down to Hershey. I don't think there was ever a master plan for having Aliaksei Protas on the big team, the Capitals, but he played so well that he found a spot on this team. Now, he's been kind of hot and cold all season. I would say he has not played as well as he did in the beginning of the season, so they had to move someone out. And why else did they do that? Because he is on a two-way deal, which means they can send him down without exposing him to the waiver wire. So I can see why they did that. So they loaned him to Hershey. Is there the possibility that they could pick him up or call him up later? Absolutely. The other player that they had to expose to the waiver wire is Joe Snively. Why? Because he's on a one-way deal. And that's where it gets a little bit dicey. Is there the possibility that someone could pick a flyer up on Joe Snively and sign him to their team? Absolutely, it could happen. See Axel Janssen-Fjällby, that happened in the fall. So There is that, and Brett Leeson. So there is always that possibility of that happening. But the Capitals understood the risk, and they, I guess, felt safe that no one was going to pick up Joe Snively. Their master plan for Joe, of course, is to have him go down to Hershey. That's what I want for him. But that's the way it is. And so some people out there, and it was speculated, maybe it's going to be Sonny Milano, maybe it's going to be Nicholas Abe-Kubel. Well, as it turns out, both of those players that came in, Sonny Milano, who was released from a PTO from the Flames, and Nicholas Abe-Kubel, who was on the Toronto Maple Leafs, was let go. They came in and have played so well. Sonny Milano is a playmaker. He's a baller out there. He always makes great plays. And as of late, Nicholas Abe-Kubel has been playing well as well. Nicholas is a little bit more interesting in the regard that he was scratched for the longest period of time. He came to this team, he was suspended, but he kind of has endeared himself to this team based on his play as of late. He's got a set of wheels underneath of him, and he brings a physicality to this team. So it is tough decisions for the Capitals to make. Like I said, on a weekend, on a Saturday that they weren't, scheduled to play, the Capitals were busy with the return of Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom. So now the overarching thing on all of this here is it going to offset the team chemistry? That's the big thing for me. And you know what you're saying, Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom coming back, that is a win-win. And I agree with you for the most part, but this team is humming along so well right now. Is it going to kind of off kilter the chemistry a little bit? Wilson and Backstrom have not played on this team the entire season. And there's, some losers in this situation potentially. You take a look at Connor Sherry, for example, who's played, a lot of the period of the time on the top line right wing. Is he going to get a demotion for Tom Wilson to step in there? Tough decisions to make, and then you take Nick Backstrom, who they say was practicing with Ovechkin and Wilson. I just don't really see him playing on the top line when he returns. For one, what condition is Nick Backstrom going to be in? And even if he is 100%, in the last year or so, he hasn't played on the top line with Alex Ovechkin in some time. So maybe that was just for practicing purposes. It's been Kuznetsov and it's been Dylan Strome kind of vacillating between the first and second line. So some, difficult decisions, suffices to say, for this team, but an eventful Saturday to be sure. But this is big news. What does Tom Wilson bring to the lineup? Of course, he brings a physicality. He brings a leadership. He brings goal scoring. So that is much needed. And then what do you have in Nick Backstrom, a guy that leads the team in assists? He's out there. He's going to be out there playmaking with Ovechkin. He has assisted on a lion's share of Alex Ovechkin's goals. So win, win, win. My only, cause of caution out there is the fact of chemistry. Is it going to upset the chemistry a little bit with this team? Even though they're familiar with this team, they have not been a part of this team on the ice anyway, up until now. The team, that struggled in October and November is firing on all cylinders right now and has really kind of started to make a push up the standings. What is that going to do with the lineup? All right, so after the break here, we will continue to talk about this eventful Saturday for the Capitals, despite the fact that they had no game. We'll talk about that next. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? Then you got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. If you're like me, where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then man, I've got the thing for you. You got to try a Built Bar. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, so delicious you won't think they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bar so great? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And even better, they're healthy, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar. And now you don't need to wait around for a box. For years, we've been telling you how to order Built at Built.com, but now you can get them at Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. All right, welcome back into this weekend edition of Locked On Capitals. An eventful Saturday to be sure for the Capitals, as Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom are scheduled to return to this team and be in the lineup tomorrow on the Capitals as they take on the Blue Jackets. It's going to be one heck of a game to see how, in fact, they play, in what capacity do they play. It was a tough decision, and they had to have a team meeting. They had to have Peter Laviolette meeting with, Brian McClellan. We're going to make decisions that are best for the team and give us the best chance of being successful, both short-term and long-term, Laviolette said in Washington Hockey. Now, when it comes to Protas, it was a logical move. The 22-year-old is the only player who didn't require waivers, like I talked about. So reassigning him wouldn't put him at risk of being claimed. He is also developing his name and can benefit more time from being on ice and responsibility. He's played 41 games up with Washington this season, dishing 3 goals and 6 assists while spending a lot of time on the fourth line. Going back to the Bears, he can get more ice time and responsibility and continue to build on his experience while taking aspects of his NHL growth with him and incorporating that further into his all-around game. You take a look at it, it's got to be a bit of a blow to the ego of someone like Aliaksei Protas, who just, he did his level best. He put his work in, he put his time in the preseason and camp and, proved his worth. And then all of a sudden you get sent down to Hershey. I've never played in the NHL, but for me, that would be a dejecting moment. That would be, a tough thing to deal with. But, they're professional hockey players, and you got to be thinking, this is just a minor setback. There is always the possibility that Sonny Milano or Nicolas Aube-Kubel or one of the other players could start to slip or get injured. So then there might be another opportunity for someone like Aliaksei Protas or potentially Joe Snively if he clears waivers. So all is not lost. But the big thing for us now is 2 huge pieces come back to this team in the form of Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom. I almost think this makes this team a super group. I'm really looking forward to what they bring. I'm looking to having that physical presence of Tom Wilson back out on the ice where you're not pushing us around. If you're going to push someone around, you're going to answer to me, because sooner or later, I'm going to have a shift with you. And, my reputation precedes me. And if you want to go to hockeyfights.com, maybe you can see what Tom Wilson brings to the table. But that's not just all he brings. He brings goal scoring in a leadership, like I've talked about in this podcast. Alex Ovechkin is going to hang up the skates at some point, and I see Tom Wilson being the future captain of your Washington Capitals. Nick Backstrom, huge player, assisted on more goals of Alex Ovechkin than anyone else. A playmaker, has an eye on the rink better than anyone. So 2 huge upgrades. This is a win-win-win. The only thing that could be better is if we found out John Carlson, in fact, was coming back soon. But the good thing about the Caps is the blue line is humming along, thanks in part to big contributions from Gustafsson and Van Riemsdyk out there, and Dmitry Orlov just firing on all cylinders. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL Prospects, your daily podcast covering the next generation of hockey superstars leading up to the NHL draft. Locked On NHL Prospects, available on YouTube and wherever you find your podcast. So once again, thank you for joining me on this weekend edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holming, and I'll talk to you again next time.